you probably shouldn't watch Blue Eye Samurai. It's not what you're expecting from a Netflix anime. It's a story about revenge and honor.
Revenge. I'll avenge us, Mama. I swear it.
Love revenge.
Lust and love, loyalty and betrayal, willies and gazongas. Oh, did I mention it has full frontal nudity?
PK.
I feel inclined because often dismemberment, gutting, beheading infant skeletons don't always make clear the adult nature of a show. But boobs usually does. So just to be clear, this is not a show for kids, this is an adult anime, and it is excellent. And while this isn't the typical format for an everything great about video, that's still very much what this video is. And I plan to entirely spoil it for you, knowing full well that you'll still want to watch it anyway. But first, a non-spoiler overview in case you want to bail on this video for 6-ish hours and then come back later while politely letting the video play all the way through on mute. Mizu, the Blue Eye Samurai, is a biracial, half-white, half-Japanese, expert swordsman on a quest to find 4 white men who were living in Japan when Mizu was born. Mizu meets new companions along the way like Ringo, a man looking to be great at anything who offers a lot of comedy and sincere warmth. The other main concurrent story is Akemi's, a princess in love with an undefeated samurai of lower birth named Taigen. There's also several evil men doing and plotting evil things. It's gorgeous in the way that you just want to paint scenes and hang them on your wall. It's brutal and gory, the score is meaningful and moving, it's sensual and perverse, it takes its time and tells a beautiful story about not so beautiful things. It leaves no unseemly stone unturned, from bigotry, xenophobia, and misogyny to greed, obsession, love and hatred, purpose in life. You name it, it's here. The voice cast includes Maya Erskine, Kenneth Branagh, Randall Park, George Takei. Everyone lets loose and knocks it out of the park. Go watch it if that interests you, or like I said, just watch my video and then go watch it, because you'll still want to. Okay, you're back. One of the main hooks of the show is something that's confirmed at the end of the first episode, and the way it's done is, I guess, let's say subversive, but also almost refreshing. Like I said, there is full frontal nudity, and the first female to go full Monty is Mizu. That's right, big surprise, I know, it's definitely hinted at in the trailer. I didn't actually watch the trailer until after it just appeared on my Netflix homepage, and I thought, sure, why not? And then my mind got all kinds of blowed.
Peaches.
But also the voice actor is Maya Erskine. Mizu has relatively feminine features, but it's actually the first great creative choice that tells part of the story and sets the stage. Because to us, it's very clear that Mizu is a woman, but in the Edo period of Japan, it's not even a fleeting consideration to the vast majority of the people she encounters. Female samurai did exist, but by the time of the Edo period, their status was greatly diminished. At one point, Madame Kaji spells it out plainly.
Revenge is a luxury for men. Like you.
Also, you are correct, that's the voice of the original Mulan that has some similarities with the show. But we're given solid reasons why everyone has Clark Kent level blinders throughout. A woman could never defeat a man in a duel, Mizu does. A lowly orphan could never rise to greatness, Mizu does. And everyone assumes everyone else is sticking to the class structure and the gender roles that they themselves adhere to. Mizu does not. Mizu dresses like a man, wears a sword, and hides everything feminine about her as best she can. The irony about it all is how often one of her enemies tells her to remove her hat and glasses because they know her secret. Almost as if because they see through her disguise pretending to be fully Japanese, they don't even consider she could be hiding anything else. Then we have Akemi, who is the perfect counterpart to Mizu because her story is also entirely about breaking the mold of gender that is forcefully, sometimes violently pushed upon her. She just happens to follow the majority of the social guidelines of her gender. She's also shattering gender norms, just in a completely different way. And her oppression is also all the proof we need to understand why Mizu hides herself the way she does. The show also explores men, but much of it is in a way that says men in power is just the norm, and obviously it was in this place and time. It goes beyond even that though. The cast system is present obviously, and it creates some crossover in people's hierarchical ranking, as it were. Early on, we see a woman and child nearly freezing to death outside the gates of a city because they lack the proper paperwork, which they literally cannot possess because women can't travel without men. But we also often see the absolute callousness of those with status, power, and money treat those without. Abijah Fowler is one of those evil men I spoke of earlier, and the first potential father we meet in the show. He murders at least one male messenger just for giving him bad news, and we have a saying for that. He's a man so steeped in his own evil that his version of coming up for air is attempting to negotiate with Jesus like two mob bosses sitting down for a meeting.
I believe there's something I can do for you.
There's also a montage of Heiji Shindo's brothel hop he created for Abijah that ends in someone's throat being slit during Well, I can't show it or even really describe it on YouTube. Check out Nebula, because apparently they were doing Hostel stuff before Hostel in the Edo period, I don't know. And that actually brings me to the last thing I think is only fair to say. I don't know exactly how historically accurate this show is. I know the creators went to great lengths to get the combat, culture, architecture, stuff like that correct, even the way Japanese women walked at the time. I also know that Japan did close its doors to foreigners for almost 300 years. Obviously, that would fuel a lot of racism and xenophobia, but I also know that the crux of the show's ending ignores that the Shogun's guards had firearms by this time. I don't personally care because it plays perfectly into the theme of the show. Abijah is the literal unstoppable West come to destroy all that is beautiful, sacred, and honorable. Mizu hates herself because that's how she feels she was created. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. From what I've gathered, some stuff is right on, other stuff is stretched to make the show more engrossing. I mean, everyone is speaking English, and while Randall Park's Teiji Shindo is one of my favorite characters, he can be a little too 2023 at times. This is not a criticism, it works, and I love it.
There are no white men in Japan. That's the law. No one would break the law.
But you know what else I love? The thing that drew most of us in during that first episode?
PK.
Yup, the boobs. Sorry, JK, it's the action, it's the setting, it's the visuals in general. The CGI mixed with 2D style gives it a whole other flavor compared to most anime. It's every character having a defining trait that bucks what I call the Archer paradigm, wherein everyone is a perfect human specimen. They're flawed and human and are injured like humans. There's a mix of realism and fantasy in the visual language that makes every scene intense and awe-inspiring at the same time. Every episode has at least one moment that makes you either go, whoa, or wow, or some variation. And I'm going to tell you mine from each episode. Episode 1's first flapping phallus may not count, but Hachi's fingers getting chopped off do. Story-wise, it's our first combat with Mizu, and I think most of us assume she's going to take his hand clean off, but she actually shows restraint and skill. It only takes 2 fingers to get what she needs, which is the name of the man who sold Hachi the gun. Well, 4 fingers total, but the second 2 were on him. He held them out for her. Also, before slicing, she says this:
"You don't deserve my blade. You don't even deserve this blade."
And it's funny because that's also her blade that the noodle shop must have bought from Meiji. You can see her stamp on it. But the real moment in Hammer Scale is Mizu's Bruce Lee battle against an entire dojo, where she very calmly shows us that her skill level is so far above and beyond the typical swordsman, it's like child's play for her. We don't even see her take down the first 3, they just fly through a wall. We only know that she wasn't even using a sword or bokken yet. Then she taunts them, makes a guy break his own arm, and just as the score picks up, she starts really teaching them lessons. It has a bonus benefit of being a genius way to introduce Taigen as the only opponent that even comes close to her level. But the teeth, the freaking slow-mo batting of the teeth, there's a weight to them as she drives them into the pillar. An amazing way to open the show. We're immediately hooked. Episode 2, An Unexpected Element, also ends in an extraordinary battle, but more importantly, it's our true introduction to Akemi with the show's first sex scene. Possibly a controversial take from the wholesome movie guy, but I like the sexuality of the show. It's such a huge component for some of the powerful women, especially Akemi, that to cut it out or cut away would be like cutting away every time someone gets sliced with a katana. And it showcases everything from the absolute depravity of Abijah, who needs people to be in pain to feel satisfied, to Akemi's slow progress in learning how to use her sexuality as a weapon, since shoes don't always pan out. And the mix of sex and violence can be off-putting, absolutely. During Akemi and Taigen's encounter, she describes how he'll beat the Blue-Eye Samurai in a duel complete with thrusting swords and spraying blood. It's not my particular kind of pillow talk, but you do you. And then the ending has Mizu taking on the 4 fangs on a cliffside. Like the literal side of a cliff, and it's as epic as it sounds. But the reason it stands out to me is because of the setup and payoff that's so satisfying, because this scene stands on its own. Mizu's a badass. She's centering herself while training, done and done. But then she uses the exact same focus with the one-handed handstand and the exact same movements to cut one of the 4 fangs in 2. What I truly love about this scene is the difference in outcome. Yes, she cuts her enemy in half, but at the expense of her footing, and is injured in the process, reminding us in a matter of seconds that no one is like Mizu, not even Taigen, but Mizu is still human. Episode 3, A Fixed Number of Paths, has one of the more epic set pieces, the arrow assault as they escape T. Just when you think they're in the clear in the narrow passage, arrows start flying in and ricocheting off rocks for a supremely claustrophobic terror. And the way arrows are presented in the show are not your typical 5/16 shaft arrows. These are like 3/4 inch pieces of hardwood burying themselves 6 inches into the wooden flooring. And while the set piece is phenomenal, it also leads to the first time Mizu agrees with Ringo that he's
useful.
And it's the first moment we see Mizu and Taigen acknowledge that the other is a skilled swordsman. Heartwarming all around, even the crazy sexual tension between Mizu and Taigen because there are so many confusing variables. Episode 4, Peculiarities, ends a story and a complete surprise to me, which was actually built on top of another surprise. Kinuyo was one of Madame Kaji's girls who was taken by the big bad of the town, Boss Hamata. Just when you think Madame Kaji is about to ask Mizu to kill Boss Hamata,
You want me to kill Boss Hamata?
No. Her.
She instead says it must be Kinuyo. Not such a happy ending for anyone. Right up until the last second, it seems like Mizu has other plans, but the trick she's using to put Kinuyo at ease worked on me, and I think I actually jumped the first time I saw it. It's also a case of people in the story failing to predict how others will react, which is an odd sentence, I realize, but in scripted dramas like this, generally if a person sending the protagonist on a side quest says the magic phrase will work, it works. Madame Kaji tells Mizu to make a sign so that Kinuyo will know it's her doing and will be at peace, but instead it freaks Kinuyo right out. I think the truth is that there's more to Madame Kaji than we know. I also have to wonder if there was any significance to the bird that startles Mizu, some foreshadowing perhaps? She lays the dead mother bird next to her eggs. Hamada seems pretty angry. Killing everyone because his enslaved girl is dead? Nah, kill everyone because there's way more to that story. Again, no matter what, it's fair to say there's no happy ending for anyone in this episode. Episode 5, The Tale of the Ronin and the Bride, both picks up right where 4 left off and gives us a look back at Mizu's past and the last time she was fully honest with someone. While the spar is fun to watch, the painful lesson that Mizu learns is what handily explains many of the whys of Mizu. We cut back and forth between her battle with the samurai outside Mikio's house to her taking on dozens of the Claw Army. It's done so cleanly that it would be impossible to miss what we're being shown. The final moment of the flashback is one of the most heartbreaking but beautiful moments in the show. And it might be why this particular episode is ranked the highest on IMDb. That's what people like, right? Creative filmmaking? But both Mizu's mother, or nurse if you believe Fowler, and her husband die in a matter of seconds, and both out of focus behind Mizu. Such a huge, monumental shift in Mizu's life, but it matters less than the decision she's already made. The one she made the second Mikio turned his back on her. She kills Mikio almost as an afterthought on her way back to her old life. Sure, Mikio had just killed her mother, but to Mizu, I think they were both already dead. It's brutal and moving. And the entire backstory plays alongside a puppet show about a Ronin, which ends in an Onryo being born. In this episode, we see Mizu make at least one decision that goes against her being an Onryo, and she pays for it. But after the memory is complete, she doesn't shy away from it. It's the reason Ringo finally abandons her side, and the last thing that's unveiled is that the entire puppet story that we'd been watching from the beginning was for the Shogun and his new daughter-in-law with newly blackened teeth, Akemi. One long gut punch of an episode. I know. Episode 6 seems like a gimme, right? It's the assault on the fortress. All evil dreams and angry words is complete with booby traps, psychedelic trips, demon monsters, and monkey. And yeah, it's fantastic, but the win of this episode is the eclectic score. Sounds like a good way to get a copyright claim, idiot. Agreed, let's do it anyway. It opens with Emmy Meyer's cover of For Whom the Bell Tolls as like a signal that this episode will be off the wall, and it is. Mizu's first standoff with Samurai plays a cover of Genie 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 by the Stray Cats, which feels like another nod to Kill Bill in tone and juxtaposition. Also, this section does have one bit of action I want to point out. This little double skip she does to get her footing right before slide tackling the goon. No notes. But in between the different needle drops is Amy Doherty's exquisite score that takes on horror vibes in this episode. Once Mizu gets through the prisoners turned vampires and rescues Taigen, she faces off with the giant again, and this time For Whom the Bell Tolls kicks in and turns the giant into a flaming demon. I hate to keep using the word, but it's freaking epic. When she finally explodes the big boy, she ends up scaling the outside of the wall to an industrial piece of music that plays right into Mizu's decompensation. In other words, she's falling apart. It all comes to a crescendo after Fowler shows her the power of his gun and starts beating Taigen to a pulp. The score builds and builds until Mizu's memories of Ringo help her make the decision to live.
Okay. I'll teach you.
And then we get to Nothing Broken, episode 7. It's very much the calm before the storm episode. Penultimate episodes often are. Everyone is getting into place and preparing for what's about to happen. One of the more interesting things about the episode is the time jump. Episode 6 ends with Mizu clutching to 6 inches of ice on top of the water, putting us pretty deep in winter, and when 7 starts, it's spring. It makes sense because both her and Taigen's wounds were extensive and would need a few months to heal. So we end up spending more time in Edo learning about Akemi's situation, which brings us to the win for this episode. Edo. It's Edo. Well, it's beauty. The sakura trees are in full bloom, cherry blossom petals are falling around them like the snow has been falling for the last 6 episodes. And much like the sexuality of the show, it's not there by mistake. It's there to remind us of the world these people live in. The first time we actually get a glimpse of the cherry blossoms is when Akemi frees her engagement gift bird. The sky is clear, perfect blue, the colors around her are vibrant, you can feel the warm dirt under her feet. She's feeling as free as the bird for a split second, and then BAM! The bird is shot out of the air by her husband.
You saw something beautiful and your first thought was to kill it. You're as cruel as they say.
But the episode is a perfect highlight of how gorgeous everything has been. Even with a breeze at the edge of the cliff, you can almost feel the warmth in the air. Dust particles floating in the light for the first time since it's always been raining during Mizu's flashbacks to Kohama. And beyond what we see as viewers, it's also the episode that forces Mizu to try things in a new way. Her revenge path has been a solo one. She forged her own sword, she fights her own battles, she makes her own way. Only, that's not actually true, and she'd be dead had both Ringo and Taigen not weaseled their way next to her. If not for Taigen, she'd likely have arrows sticking out of her, and without Ringo, she'd never have gotten into Miho no Seki. Actually, Akemi saved her once too. Mizu's goal is to brute force everything. The first fire she lights to reforge her sword, you can just feel her saying, I'll just try harder. And not only does that not always work, it's already not worked for her. She just hasn't realized it yet. Whatever the actual significance of the Heart Sutra and what it means to write it all over her body, she can't complete it alone. There's something so very raw and vulnerable about her standing nude in front of a fire to melt down her sword only to return it to Swordfather. As if in the act of completing the task she needed to accomplish, she realized she was pointing herself in the wrong direction. It's a beautiful moment surrounded by beautiful moments. Episode 8 might be my least favorite episode overall, which is definitely not the norm. Maybe I'm just sad the season ends. So much happens in the Great Fire of 1657, but I think the thing I enjoy most is the crazy buildup of the first 20 minutes that puts us on the edge of our seats, waiting for the inevitable, and then Fowler's army just kind of walks right in. It's a very anticlimactic climax because it's not a letdown, but it's not necessarily what we expected. Fowler is bored through most of it because he understands the advantage they have and he trusts the plan. He's shooting samurai from the hip. So we spend the first half of the episode realizing how scary and powerful Fowler is, only for the script to be completely flipped when he finally faces off against Mizu. She stalks him like an actual demon, surrounded by fire, and as usual, she's wounded. Fowler does eventually get the upper hand, but not for long. Mizu is a force of nature, and everyone in her life has seen it, even her greatest enemies. The season ends with Mizu on her way to London with Fowler trapped below deck. Also, I can't show it, but I'd be remiss if I didn't mention how Taigen ends Heiji's life. It's pretty brutal. So before I talk about revenge, a few more things that I just absolutely love about this show in no particular order.
Put down that toy and draw your sword.
But then you'll die.
At this point, you've seen them all, but I haven't even talked about how each title card is unique with its own brand in the corner, and episode 6 even uses the hallucination effect that Mizu is about to experience. The camera movements often feel real, like they're done with a drone or a crane, and I haven't even given the action and swordplay enough credit because so much of it was choreographed out using live-action stunt people. Just a level of care that boggles the mind. It's in the visuals too. When it's turning to spring in Kohama, you can still see a little bit of snow in the shadows under the fence. I mentioned the snow that almost stands still in the air throughout most of the season and how it turns to cherry blossom petals, but the last episode has its own version, Ash. Beauty in the ugly everywhere you look. It's also surprisingly funny while not relying on humor.
Taigen has won 24 duels. How many have you won?
Should I have been counting?
We get to hear George Takei's Seki say this.
Been some time since I killed a man. I wonder if I still remember how.
It hasn't been that long since the Naked Time, George. But it's not till 5 episodes later that he confirms it. And then Ringo steals the show with his numerous one-word one-liners.
Snowcap! Shogun! Revenge!
But there's also the odd couple dynamic between Mizu and Taigen. Subtle stuff like when Taigen says no one gets to kill you but me, and Mizu doesn't respond, and then we just cut to them riding. Taigen also actually has some of the funnier lines.
Are you real?
I think so.
I have a man to kill.
I hate you.
But the story-long arc of Taigen and Mizu's relationship is deliberate and believable. He goes from despising Mizu to being forced to team up with her to slowly respecting her and even liking her at one point. It's such a great look into the human psyche in that he's so completely obsessed with regaining his honor he needs to protect her from death, which you know, is something we do for people we like. And our brains probably can't tell the difference between saving someone just to kill them later and saving someone just to save them. Eventually, the idea that you needed to kill them starts to seem silly. I'm not saying they won't have a duel someday, just likely not to the death, but who's to say? Much like a real relationship, they go back and forth. The only thing we really know for sure is that the moment they show each other respect for their sword skills is the moment it changes. The other vital relationship is between Mizu and Ringo, her slow softening to Ringo that eventually culminates in Mizu letting him down, and that haunts her through Abijah and Heiji's castle. She hears his voice a few times. Something that would be easy to miss is that Mizu is sorta sentimental. She takes Taigen's scarf and wears it when she leaves him with Master Eiji's broken sword. She keeps Ringo's bell as well and uses it for her new sword. I could be wrong, but I also think she takes Mikio's cloak and possibly scarf as well. Maybe these are a little more practical, but she also takes Mikio's advice.
A bit old-fashioned.
but no better weapon when outnumbered in battle.
It's that memory that spurs her to turn her sword into a naginata. Side note, it's also an amazing reveal. Up until this moment, we assumed her weights were protection, as well as something constantly making her stronger and giving her a boost of speed when she decided her opponent is worthy of removing them. But they're also part of her weapon. Such amazing character building. I mentioned back at the beginning that I love how the characters are all human, and even the dialogue sounds human. At one point, Mizu asks Heiji Shindo why he wants Abijah dead, and this is how he responds.
My reasons are my own. No. No, they're not.
He changes his mind in real time, showing us how much of a calculated negotiator he is, but not always perfect. And like I said, they all get injured like humans for the most part. Maybe the recoveries are a little quicker than normal, maybe Mizu pushes through some stuff that seems like it'd stop her. But that's kinda her thing. Mizu doesn't always acknowledge it, but she's still human. My favorite moment of her conveying that is after she kills all 4 fangs, clearly using the last milliliter of her energy, she still walks over to Taigen and accepts his challenge, and she's ready to die swinging even as she collapses due to blood loss and who knows what else. Mizu expects to summon more strength like an anime character, but finds out that she's just a person.
I am owed my honor.
Then take it.
I've loved cartoons from the time I was a kid. 90s TMNT and X-Men, through much of my teen years with Futurama is one of my favorite shows, true to this day. And then at some point in my late teens, early 20s, finally stumbling into the beautiful world of anime, especially Studio Ghibli. As an adult now, I love Rick and Morty, Samurai Champloo, Archer, Attack on Titan, Cowboy Bebop, Invincible, and now Blue Eye Samurai. Basically, if there's an animation targeted at adults, I'll watch it. Love Death Robots? Loved it! Because I'm not extremely well versed in anime, I'm sure this isn't the first time many of the elements I've talked about in this video have appeared. And I can't judge things I haven't seen yet, obviously, but I also want to make it clear that it's not the punishment or the darkness that I love. Those are just elements that tell these characters' story and amplify the emotions behind them. And that brings me to the main arc of the show, the very reason she seems like an unstoppable force of nature. Let's finally talk about the word on the thumbnail for the video. Revenge is great. Look, I'm not crazy. Revenge is terrible, but as a storytelling device to help us connect to a character, and all done through animation, you can find 50 variations of the quote, "The best revenge is success." Alfred Hitchcock is attributed with saying, "Revenge is sweet and not fattening." But the best quote for my money is something like, "If you go looking for revenge, dig 2 graves." Mr. Miyagi or someone, the internet doesn't agree. There's no redemption in revenge. There's no satisfaction, no joy, no peace. And I don't know where this story is going exactly, likely a version of Mizu learning similar lessons, but not yet. And not without insurmountable loss. Kill Bill is essentially a revenge story as well, and a hyper-realized version of reality not too dissimilar to Blue Eye Samurai. The blood sprays and physical feats are beyond what we expect. Also, the moment that Battle Without Honor or Humanity kicked in episode 1, we all thought the same thing. Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon is another gorgeous movie that plays with the laws of physics to create beautiful sequences that defy our understanding. But for me, Blue Eye Samurai even exceeds those high bars set. Telling a purely adult, brutal, and unforgiving story with animation opens up to possibilities in every single arena. Right before I started Blue Eye Samurai, I watched another Netflix show, Onimusha. It is also for adults, and it's also pretty good. I wouldn't put its storytelling or animation anywhere near Blue Eye Samurai, but I enjoyed it. One of the main things that Blue Eye Samurai has over Onimusha is that I never lose touch with Mizu's humanity, or Taigen, Heiji, Abijah, Akemi, none of them. Abijah challenges it more than most because of his power and speed when contrasted with what we've already learned about Mizu. Granted, he's done nothing but study for decades, he's a solid antithesis to Mizu in that way. But it's much easier to, I guess, realize you're watching an anime with Onimusha. It's not at all a bad thing. The 2D styling is part of the appeal, and it also deals with darkness and light, Onis and Genmas, a man's struggle to control his darker side. But ultimately, it's tame compared to Blue Eye Samurai. So when I say revenge is great, actually, I don't mean getting your revenge. I mean that a story about revenge has so much to teach us that we wouldn't get from a sanitized, more benign story. And because anime allows this amplified version of reality, the stakes are higher, the solutions are surprising, all while telling a tortured story that feels true to life. And most of these characters are vile. We make excuses for Mizu, and much of what she does endears us to her, but she's still driven by a singular and evil purpose. There's no benefit to revenge except maybe protecting the world from bad people, but her quarrel with Abijah isn't about his gun business or the coup he planned, and it's not going to be about the particular trades of the other white men. It's bloodlust. The season ends on a huge cliffhanger where Mizu gets to see what her bloodlust has wrought. And that's it. She works so close to her goal, but the biggest impact she had on the world is burning a city to ash and killing a crap load of people, both innocent and guilty alike. But there's no moment where she turns from her quest and atones. She's got 2 more names and she sets out to find them. Mizu is not a hero. Not yet, at least. And part of the reason I like that is the same reason I was hesitant to make this video, because I don't want to encourage anyone to watch the show and have them come away with the wrong lesson. But I love adult animation that allows us to engage with it on the character's terms. Mizu doesn't need to save the cat, even if she does, because the creators trust us to judge the characters for who they are and the actions they take. I mentioned earlier that Mizu hates herself, but it's actually way worse than that when you really start to think about it. Her need for revenge is captivating. What is she actually angry about? She never really states that she's mad at how her mother was treated, and she clearly doesn't care too much about the woman she thinks is her mother. And her self-hatred or disgust at being multiracial never seems to push her to the point of self-harm, at least not at her own hands. You could argue her entire mission is basically akin to a death wish, but at the same time, seppuku was part of the honor code of the time, to the point that the shogun's wife tells her son to leave the lords behind to die in the fire because they didn't open their stomachs. My point here is that Mizu's campaign for revenge isn't about some concrete I was wronged type reasons. It's an existential one with no clear path to a happy ending should she get what she wants. She's angry at her very existence. Abijah didn't murder the love of her life. The treatment of women is pretty terrible in the story, but this isn't some sort of I spit on your grave type revenge story. Mizu has this sad version of nihilism ingrained in her ethos that pushes people away, also she can kill the reason she's alive. That's why this story is so fascinating and unique and made me want to rewatch it immediately. Her entire motivation is that she feels she never should have existed. Dark. But with all that said, for me, when it comes to my anime narratives, revenge is great, actually. So, if you haven't watched the show, go watch it. I promise that learning plot details and seeing some of the pretty settings don't do the actual show justice. A few postscript things I pulled out of the main body for pacing. If I had to lodge some complaints, I do wish the season had a little more of a conclusion. If the second season isn't greenlit, that will suck. I'd still like it for what it is, but that'll suck. But honestly, the biggest complaint I have is how Mizu and most of the samurai hold their katanas. It probably looks cooler the way they do it, but katanas are all about power and leverage. They're heavy. So samurai would have one hand close to the tsuba, the handguard, and one basically on the kashira, or pummel, with their hands as far apart as possible to maintain that leverage. Honestly though, most media featuring katanas make them seem lightweight. Part of that is the intense training that makes their weight seem less to a skilled wielder. But also, I have a real functional katana because I'm that kind of nerd who apparently had $1,500 burning a hole in his pocket at 19. Spoiler, I didn't. But I sure do still have an awesome katana, and it weighs 4 pounds. I imagine just by seeing me hold it, you can get an idea of how heavy it is. Anyway, I'm sure you also noticed I use she, her pronouns for Mizu. For me, it was because it seems to be generally how she refers to herself. From what we're shown, it upsets her that her mother forces her to live as a boy, and twice in the show she tries to tell people that she's a woman. My personal take is that she isn't trans, but I still think seeing Mizu as transmasculine coded is 100% valid and in the text of the show. She binds her chest even when it causes her great pain. I think you could make a case for Envy as well. We don't know exactly how Mizu feels about her gender, other than that she feels she needs to hide that she was assigned female at birth so she can get into places she wants and do what she wants. What was originally a choice by her mother to help her hide became a tool she used to her advantage. I felt odd bringing it up just to say I don't think that, because I'm not 100% sure on what I think, and characters can represent you without explicitly being you. Coding can be cool like that. In closing, Blue Eye Samurai has been an obsession for a while now. I did something I very rarely do, which was that the second I finished the season, I immediately restarted it. And at some point needed to write down my thoughts about it because not enough people are talking about it. And I also know that there are 100 shows you'd have rather me covered, but this particular video took over 2 weeks, and I just have a hard time pushing through and creating something I'm proud of if I'm not passionate about it. I loved making an excuse to spend extra time with the show, so it's not the most exhaustive everything great about video ever because I wanted to fit the entire season in one video while still celebrating it. So if you like this format, even if you don't know or love the show yet, let me know. Thanks for sticking with me to the end. And if you're sad there was no typical everything great about video this week, I got you covered. Everything great about Gremlins is up on Nebula right this very second, just in time for Christmas, as it is one of the best Christmas movies of all time. And if you sign up with my link, you get 40% off an annual plan, or for a limited time, we're offering lifetime subscriptions again. I know it's not for everybody, $300 is not cheap, but if you want access to everything forever, or it might be right for you. Also, there are still thousands of you who signed up with the bundle to get Nebula, and that is officially over. So if you're on automatic renewal, you won't have Nebula anymore. But we've got you covered. You can get 40% off an annual or monthly plan using the unbundle link and keep your access to all my ad-free, sponsor-free, early, uncensored videos. This video is up there right now uncensored, as well as a bunch of my exclusives and originals from your other favorite creators and awesome shows like Jet Lag that you need to get into if you haven't already. All of Lindsay Ellis's videos are exclusively on Nebula now. Her latest is all about the life and death of family-friendly Las Vegas. And it's a great way to support me as YouTube continues to make certain types of content harder and harder to publish here. I mean, I put my Blue Eye Samurai video up here because I'd like to expand my audience and dive into other formats and types of media, but it is heavily altered. We spent hours making sure that every drop of blood has been desaturated, every private part blocked out enough so that YouTube won't demonetize and bury the video. But in the process, I think the show is robbed of some of what makes it appealing and gorgeous, and I really hate that. The real version of everything about Blue Eye Samurai is great is on Nebula, so sign up and join me over there. We're adding new exclusive content every day. Thanks.
You're good. Maybe better than me. And no one is better than me.